Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you are new here, this is the show where we take a massive stack of articles, research papers, and expert analysis, and we basically distill it all down.
We get to the good stuff.
We get to the good stuff, the most essential insights you need to know. We do all the heavy reading so that you don't have to.
That is the promise. And today, well, today's a little different, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Usually, we're talking about the future of AI or sustainable energy, maybe the economics of the coffee industry. But today, we're stepping into a space that, quite frankly, it touches every single one of us, eventually. But it's a space that is currently going through this massive, massive transformation. So I want to welcome you to what we've been calling the Funeral Channel Network experience of the Deep Dive.
It does sound a bit grim when you say it like that, I have to admit.
It does, it does. But stick with us, please, because this isn't about being morbid at all. It's about innovation. It's about innovation in one of the oldest human rituals that exists.
Right.
We are looking at how technology is fundamentally reshaping the way we say goodbye. We're doing a deep dive into this fascinating piece of research we found. It's titled Digital Legacies: The Evolution of Virtual Memorials and Tributes.
And I think the absolute key word in that title is evolution.
Right.
Why that word?
Because for the longest time, for years, the whole conversation around virtual funerals or, online memorials was so binary. It was one thing or the other.
Okay, so what were the two options?
It was either the real thing, the church, the cemetery, the black suits, the whole physical experience, or it was the backup plan.
The backup plan. The thing you do when something goes wrong.
Exactly. You do the Zoom funeral because you absolutely cannot be there. It was always, always seen as plan B.
Yeah, it was viewed as like a failure of logistics. If you were the one logging in remotely, it meant you couldn't make it, something had gone wrong, your flight got canceled, you got sick. You failed, in a way. But the source material, it just paints a completely different picture. It argues that we're not talking about Plan B anymore. We're seeing the emergence of something entirely new.
And I think that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To understand exactly that. How are these three things, grief, tradition, and technology, crashing into each other?
They're not just coexisting, they're intersecting in some really complex ways.
Yeah.
And the core thesis here, what the source keeps coming back to, is that they're creating something that isn't just a replacement for a funeral.
It's an expansion of it.
That's the word, an expansion.
That, for me, was the big aha moment. I'll be honest, when I first started reading this, I had that exact knee-jerk reaction you mentioned.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, virtual memorials, that's just for when you're stuck in a pandemic or you can't afford the plane ticket.
It feels functional.
Totally functional, but cold, impersonal. But the text frames these things as living spaces. And that phrase just stopped me in my tracks.
Yes.
These aren't just one-off video calls that, disappear into the ether the second the host clicks end meeting.
No.
They're becoming essential, persistent environments. Places.
It fundamentally changes the timeline of grief.
Yeah.
Think about a traditional funeral. It is an event. It has a start time, usually 11:000 a.m., and an end time, maybe 1:00 p.m.
It's finite.
Completely. You go to the service, you pay your respects, you eat a sad sandwich at the reception, and then you go home. It's very linear. A virtual memorial, especially the way this source describes it, is a destination.
A destination. I like.
It's a place you can return to.
Yeah.
It breaks the boundaries of time and geography in a way that, physical spaces, for all their power, simply cannot do.
So here's our roadmap for the hour. We're going to start with that evolution. Why is this happening now? Spoiler alert. It's not just because the technology exists.
Yeah.
That's the simple but wrong answer. Then we're going to really get into this core concept of living spaces of remembrance. After that, we have to talk about the psychology of it all, because let's be real, crying into a webcam feels very, very different than crying in a church pew.
It does. It feels weird. And we need to discuss how to navigate that uncanny valley of online grief. It's a real thing.
Absolutely. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts, the platforms, the logistics, and something the source calls the tech host, which I think is a brilliant, totally actionable idea for anyone listening who might, have to plan one of these.
Oh, it's a game changer.
And finally, we'll talk about design, ethics, and the future of our digital legacies. So buckle up. This is going to be a really fascinating ride.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with section 1. The evolution. Why now? And I think the easy answer that everyone jumps to is, well, because the internet exists, because we have Zoom. But the source material suggests it's so much deeper than that.
It's much deeper. If it were just about the technology being available, we would have seen the shift 20 years ago. I mean, we had webcams in 2005, we had Skype, we had basic internet connections.
So the tools were there in a clunky form.
The tools were there, but the funeral industry historically is incredibly slow to adapt. It is steeped, and I mean steeped, in tradition. For good reason, in some ways.
So what changed? What was the tipping point?
The catalyst for change here, according to the text, is a single word: necessity. And it's not technological necessity, it's sociological necessity.
Sociological necessity. Okay, unpack that for us. What does that mean in this context?
Think about the modern family structure. Let's just go back 50, 60 years. You likely lived in the same town where you were born.
Right.
Your parents probably lived down the street. Your extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, was probably all within a 30-mile radius.
Right. It was a very local existence for most people.
It was. So when someone passed away, the logistics were, relatively speaking, simple. Everyone could physically get to the church or the funeral home within a day or two.
You just drive over, you bring a casserole. It's a local event.
Exactly. You bring a casserole. Now look at us. Look at our lives. Families are so geographically dispersed. You might have siblings on different continents. I do.
Yeah, I have friends scattered across the globe from college, from previous jobs, people who were really important to me at one point.
And the source specifically points to this dispersion as a primary driver. We've become global citizens in our lives, but death has remained stubbornly local.
That disconnect, that's the friction point.
That's the friction. And then you start to layer other things on top of that. You have mobility issues for the elderly. You have serious health considerations, which obviously became incredibly prominent in the last few years.
It forced the issue.
It forced the issue. And critically, something that we can't ignore: financial constraints.
That financial piece is just huge. I mean, I was looking at flights the other day just for a vacation, and it's eye-wateringly expensive. Last-minute airfare for a family of 4 to fly across the country for a funeral?
Forget about it.
You could be talking thousands of dollars.
Thousands. And that's money that people often simply do not have, especially on short notice when they're already dealing with, emotional trauma.
So what was the choice before? It was this terrible feeling of, you just don't go. You send flowers. You make a call. And you feel guilty.
You feel horrible. You feel like you're disrespecting the memory. You feel like you're letting the family down.
Right. It feels like you're failing in your duty as a friend or a relative because your bank account didn't align with the timing of a tragedy.
Precisely. And so what we saw was this growing tension, a tension between the deep human desire to honor a loved one and the logistical financial reality of modern life. The virtual tribute didn't emerge because some tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to monetize grief? It emerged because real people all over the world were asking, how do we do this? How do we mourn together when we physically can't be together?
It's almost like the remote work revolution, isn't it? I keep coming back to that analogy.
How do you mean?
Well, for years, the corporate world said work had to happen in an office. You had to be in the cubicle from 9 to 5 to be productive. There was a real stigma against working from home.
Oh, a huge stigma.
Then, necessity, a global pandemic, forced us to go remote, and suddenly everyone realized, wait a minute, this actually works. Life happens everywhere. So why should remembrance be stuck in one specific zip code if the people who love the deceased are all over the map?
That is a very, very apt analogy. And just like with remote work, once that initial barrier was broken by necessity, we started seeing all these other benefits we didn't even expect.
Right.
The text really emphasizes this concept of the removal of barriers. It argues that online memorials, and this is a key phrase, they democratize attendance.
Democratize attendance. I really like that phrase. Unpack that a little more.
It means that the barrier to entry for paying your respects is lowered to almost zero. Think about the sort of unspoken hierarchy of grief at a traditional funeral.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy.
Right. The front row is the spouse and children, then the siblings, then the extended family, then close friends. If you are, say, an extended family member, maybe a cousin twice removed or a college friend from 20 years ago who hasn't spoken to the deceased in a decade,
You might feel like you're intruding if you show up.
you might feel like an intruder. Or you might just not be able to justify the disruption. You might think to yourself, I really want to go, but can I honestly take 3 days off work and spend $800 on a flight for someone I haven't seen in 10 years?
You feel like you're not close enough on the grief scale to warrant that level of investment, but you do want to honor them.
You do. And that's the conflict. With a virtual option, all of that friction is just gone.
Yeah.
You can log in from your kitchen table, you can be present, you can witness the service and share in that moment.
Mm.
The source argues that this allows entire communities to gather in a way that simply wasn't possible before. It's not just about the immediate family anymore, it's about the entire network, the entire web of people that person touched throughout their whole life.
It captures the long tail, so to speak, of a person's social network, all those little connections that matter.
Exactly. And that leads us directly to the next big argument the source makes, which is this idea of beyond replacement. Because there is still this stigma, right? This feeling that virtual is lesser than.
Oh, for sure. That if you really cared, you'd find a way to be there in person.
That's the hurdle. It's the same bias we have against so many digital interactions. We say it's just not the same as a real hug.
And it isn't. Let's be clear about that.
And it isn't. We shouldn't pretend it is. But the source explicitly challenges the idea that it's a bad copy or a lesser version. It quotes this idea that virtual memorials are an expansion of tradition, not a deletion of it.
An expansion. So it's not an either-er.
It's not an either-or. Think about it this way. If you have an in-person service and you decide to supplement it with a virtual component, you set up a few cameras, you have a high-quality stream, a digital guest book, you haven't taken anything away from the people in that room.
No, their experience is unchanged.
Their experience is unchanged. You haven't diminished their grief or their connection. You have simply opened the door for everyone else who couldn't be there.
It's a yes and approach.
Yeah.
Yes, we are gathering here in this physical space,
Yeah.
and we are welcoming everyone else from around the world to join us.
Yes, exactly. And the source makes a really specific distinction here that I think is important. It talks about how for some families, the virtual tribute is supplemental. It enhances the in-person service.
Okay.
But for others, it is the primary means of memorialization. Maybe the person was cremated and there is no formal service. Maybe the family is entirely scattered across 5 different countries.
Right. There is no central physical location to gather at.
None at all. And the argument is that even in that primary scenario where there is no physical gathering, it doesn't have to be impersonal. It doesn't have to be cold.
That's the key, isn't it? It all comes down to how you design it. Which brings us to, I think, the absolute core concept of this deep dive, the part of the text that really made me sit up and take notes. Living spaces of remembrance.
But this is a total paradigm shift.
So redefine the memorial for us based on this text. How are we moving from that single-day event to what the source calls indefinite accessibility?
Well, let's just really look at the ephemeral nature of a traditional funeral. It happens, and then it becomes a memory.
Take over.
It's over. Maybe you have a prayer card that you tuck in a drawer somewhere. Maybe you have a physical photo album you can pull out. But the event itself is gone. The source introduces this powerful concept of continuity.
Continuity.
In a virtual memorial, the space remains.
It's persistent. It's a URL that doesn't 404.
It's a digital location. And the text lists the kind of content that actually populates these spaces. It's not just a Zoom link that expires when the host clicks and meeting for all.
Right.
It's the live stream services, yes, but it's also things like digital guest books that people can add to over time. It's photo and video galleries. It's recorded speeches. It's music playlists.
I absolutely loved the idea of the music playlists. You know, you go to a funeral, you hear 3 hymns or maybe one favorite song during the slideshow, and that's it.
And that's it.
But in a digital space, you could have the entire soundtrack of that person's life, every song that mattered to them, available for anyone to listen to at any time.
And that's where the expert insight in the text comes in regarding flexibility. These elements, it says, can exist independently or together. You can have the live service on a Saturday morning, but the photo gallery and the guest book and that playlist can be active for months or even years.
So it's modular.
It's completely modular. It allows the family to adapt the memorial to their specific values, their culture, their needs.
It's fascinating because it allows for a completely different kind of grieving process. I'm just imagining being able to return to that space 3 months later. You know, that point when the initial shock is worn off, the casseroles have stopped coming.
The phone calls stop.
The phone calls stop, and you're alone with it, and you're really missing that person. In the traditional model, what do? You might go visit the grave.
Which can be a very solitary act, and it requires you to be in that specific town, and cemeteries close at sundown.
Right. But with this living space, I can log on at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday because I can't sleep. I can look at the photos again. I can read a news story someone just posted in the guest book last week. It feels, I don't know, less lonely.
That's exactly what the source implies. It transforms the memorial from a static, one-time event into a dynamic, living archive. It allows you to engage with the memory of the person when you need to, not just when the funeral home's schedule dictates.
It validates that grief isn't a straight line.
Not at all. It validates that grief is not a linear process that conveniently ends when the hearse drives away from the church.
But, and there's always a but with technology, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or maybe the elephant on the screen. The emotional hurdles.
The psychology of online mourning, yes.
Yeah. Section 3 in the source really dives into this. We have to address the skepticism. Because despite everything we just said about accessibility and continuity in these living spaces, there is a very real, very visceral fear that screens just feel cold, that they feel impersonal.
It's a completely valid fear. I mean, think about our relationship with our screens. We use them for spreadsheets. We use them to doom scroll the news. We use them to watch silly cat videos.
We associate them with distraction, with entertainment, or with work.
Right. We do not naturally associate them with sacred, profound moments of human connection and loss.
It's a context clash. I was just watching a comedy special on this very same screen, and now I'm supposed to be saying a final goodbye to Grandma on it. It's jarring.
Exactly. That cognitive dissonance is real. It's hard to switch emotional gears in that environment. But the source has a very powerful rebuttal to this. It argues that meaning is not inherent in the format.
Okay, say more about that.
Meaning isn't baked into whether it's physical or digital. Meaning is created through intention.
Intention, okay. Well, let's dig into that.
It means that a physical funeral can feel incredibly cold and impersonal if it's rushed, if the eulogy is generic, if the room is dingy and depressing. Just being in person doesn't automatically guarantee a deep connection.
That's so true. I have definitely been to physical funerals that felt like they were just going through the motions. You stand up, you sit down, you recite the lines, and you leave. There's no heart in it.
Exactly. Conversely, a digital memorial can feel incredibly intimate and warm and connecting if it is designed with care, with love, with intention. It's not the medium, it's the message and the delivery.
So you can't just phone it in.
You can't phone it in. And the text warns about this. You can't just copy-paste a physical service into a digital format and expect it to work. You have to design for the medium. And it talks specifically about something called emotional pacing.
This was really interesting because in a church or a hall, you have all these physical cues. You can hear people sniffling around you. You can feel the collective energy in the room. You can look around and see other people's faces, see them nodding.
Right. You are physically contained in the environment. The architecture itself, the pews, the lighting, it all holds you in that specific emotional space.
On a screen, you don't have that container. You're in your messy kitchen. Your dog might be barking in the background. You might get a Slack notification that slides down from the top of your screen.
The level of distraction is infinitely higher. And our attention span is just different online. So the source gives some very specific, actionable advice on this pacing issue. Shorter segments and very clear transitions. You simply cannot have a 45-minute meandering eulogy on a Zoom call and expect everyone to stay emotionally present. It won't work.
People start checking their email.
They will. Not because they don't care, but because the medium fights against that kind of sustained passive attention. So you need to break it up. A short reading, then a piece of music, then a brief reflection, then a photo slideshow. You have to guide the viewer through the experience much more actively than you would in person.
That's really practical advice. It's almost like you have to become a producer of a show. You have to keep the engagement up, not for entertainment value, obviously, but to maintain that fragile emotional connection.
Precisely. If people zone out, they lose that feeling of communal grooving, and that's the entire point. You're trying to preserve that feeling of being together, even if you are all physically alone in your separate rooms.
Now, there's another point in this section that I hadn't considered at all, and that's what the source calls the power of inclusivity. But in terms of psychological safety.
Yes. This is one of those hidden benefits that is so often overlooked. We usually think about accessibility in terms of, wheelchairs or ramps, physical accessibility.
Sure.
But what about emotional accessibility? What about psychological accessibility?
What do you mean by that?
The source specifically mentions individuals with disabilities, serious illness, or severe anxiety. For some people, being in a crowded room, dressed in uncomfortable clothes, surrounded by intense public displays of emotion, is incredibly overwhelming.
It could trigger a panic attack.
It absolutely could. It might be physically impossible for them to sit still and be quiet in that environment for 2 hours.
Or think about someone who's immunocompromised and just
Yeah.
can't risk being in a large gathering.
Yeah.
We certainly all learned that lesson very recently.
Exactly. Virtual spaces offer this layer of safety and control. You can grieve privately. You can turn your camera off if you need to have a big, ugly cry and you don't want anyone to see you. You can step away from the computer for a moment if it gets too intense, go get a glass of water and come back. You can't really just walk out of the front row of a church service without causing a scene.
That's actually profound. It allows people to participate who might otherwise just stay home and isolate themselves in their grief because the physical event is simply too much for them to handle.
And it validates their grief, too. It sends a message. You are a valued part of this community, even if you can't handle the intensity of the physical crowd. It's about creating a space where everyone can say goodbye in a way that feels safe and manageable for them.
Okay, so we've established that this is happening, that it's born of necessity. We've established that it can be meaningful if it's intentional and that it actually opens doors for people. But how do you actually do it?
The practicalities.
The practicalities. Because I think this is where a lot of people just freeze up. They think, I'm not a tech wizard. I can barely work my email. How on earth am I going to host a funeral online?
And that is a major, major concern. The fear of a technical glitch ruining a sacred, solemn moment is very, very high. So the source breaks this down into 2 main parts: choosing the venue and then managing the event.
Let's talk about venues. Are we just talking about using Zoom here? Is that the only option?
Not necessarily. The text makes a really helpful comparison between dedicated memorial platforms on one hand and familiar tools like video conferencing on the other.
Okay, so what's the difference? What do I get with a dedicated platform?
Well, familiar tools, your Zooms, your Skypes, your Google Meets, they're great because people already know how to use them. The barrier to entry is super low. Most people have the app installed on their phone or computer already. But they are essentially business meeting tools. They are not designed for grief.
Right, you're staring at the exact same interface you use for your Monday morning corporate stand-up meeting. It doesn't exactly scream sacred.
Not at all. Whereas these dedicated memorial platforms are built from the ground up specifically for this purpose, they often have features like built-in moderation tools, which is huge. They have permanent tribute pages, photo and video galleries, all integrated into one ecosystem.
And the vibe is just different, I imagine.
The vibe is different. The aesthetics are softer, the user interface is more intuitive for the specific emotional use case, and that aesthetic difference probably matters a lot for that intention piece we were talking about earlier.
It sets the tone.
It sets the tone immediately. But, and this is a huge but, the text stresses one golden rule above all else: accessibility. The platform, whichever one you choose, must be easy to navigate.
The grandma factor.
The grandma factor, exactly.
Right.
If your elderly aunt in another state can't figure out how to log in, the memorial has failed its purpose for her. It doesn't matter how fancy the features are if the people who need to be there most can't access them.
So simple is almost always better.
Almost always. But even with a simple platform, things can and do go wrong. And this leads to my absolute favorite practical tip from the entire source: the tech host.
Yes. This is brilliant.
It is critical. If you take one single thing away from this deep dive about logistics, let it be this. The source explicitly, strongly suggests designating a dedicated technical host or coordinator.
And to be crystal clear, this should absolutely not be the chief mourner, right? Not the spouse, not the child.
Absolutely not. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? You are the spouse or the child of the deceased. You are in the absolute depths of your grief. You are trying to deliver a eulogy or maybe just hold yourself together in the front row. The last thing, the absolute last thing you should be doing is troubleshooting why Uncle Bob's audio isn't working.
Uncle Bob, you're on mute. Uncle Bob, can you hear me now? It would just ruin the moment instantly.
It shatters the entire atmosphere. It yanks everyone out of that shared emotional space and throws them right back into technical frustration. The tech host is the buffer. They are the gatekeeper.
So what do they do?
They're the ones admitting participants from the waiting room. They manage the screen sharing for the photo slideshow. They are the ones who mute people who accidentally have their microphones on while their dog is barking in the background.
It's like having a funeral director, but for the digital space.
That is the perfect analogy. In a physical funeral, you, the grieving family member, don't show people to their seats or adjust the microphone stand on the lectern. The professional staff does that. In a digital funeral, you need a designated person to handle the room.
And the source also emphasizes preparation, doing a run-through, a rehearsal. Testing the lighting, the audio, the internet connectivity, it sounds so clinical and cold, but it's actually a profound act of care.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Preparation is an act of care. Because by handling the technology smoothly and professionally, you allow the emotion to take center stage. You make the technology invisible so that the human connection can happen unimpeded.
Moving on to Section 5, designing the experience. We've touched on this a bit with the intention piece, but the source gets into the actual visual and narrative structure.
Right, because a well-designed experience is what separates a meaningful memorial from a clunky conference call. And structure is key. The text talks about creating an arc for the service.
An arc, like a story.
Exactly. A virtual service needs a clear beginning, a middle, and an end to orient people emotionally.
Why is that even more important online than it is in person?
Because you lack all the physical transition cues. In a church, you have the procession, watching the casket be brought in. You have the act of standing up for a hymn. You have the recession, processing out to the hearse. All of that creates a natural flow.
Online, it's more abrupt. You click a link and boom, suddenly you're there. You click leave meeting and boom, suddenly you're back in your kitchen staring at a pile of dishes. It's jarring.
It's incredibly jarring. There's no transition time built in. So the opening needs to deliberately orient people. It needs to create that transition. The source suggests a formal welcome, a shared moment of silence, or playing specific music that reflects the personality of the deceased.
You have to create a threshold for people to cross, emotionally, to enter the space.
You're setting the mood. Then the middle is the core content. The readings, the reflections, maybe some pre-recorded messages from people who couldn't speak live. And then the closing needs to be just as deliberate as the opening.
You can't just cut the feed.
You cannot just abruptly end the meeting. You need words of gratitude, perhaps a forward-looking message of connection and continued support. You have to gently help people transition out of that heavy emotional space and back into their own reality.
And visually, this isn't just about looking at a grid of faces on a screen, right? The Brady Bunch grid.
No, please no. The source highlights the importance of using other visual elements, like professional backdrops for the main speakers, and especially photo and video slideshows. And this is where the source actually mentions a specific resource I thought was interesting, the funeral program site.
Oh, right. I remember seeing that in the notes. What's their deal?
Well, it's an interesting example of how this traditional industry is adapting. This is an organization that presumably started out making traditional printed funeral programs, the little paper pamphlets you get at a church service with the order of events and maybe a nice poem.
Sure, I probably have a drawer full of them from over the years.
But the text notes that they've now extended their expertise into creating digital resources. They help families translate those traditional physical elements into beautiful, well-designed online formats.
So taking the aesthetic and the dignity of a classic funeral program and making it digital.
Exactly. And this leads to this wonderful idea of hybrid integration. The source talks about how families can email a PDF version of the program to all the remote attendees so they can follow along.
Oh, that's a really nice touch. I love that. Because even if I'm in my living room in Seattle and the funeral is happening in New York, if I have that program open on my iPad, or maybe even printed it out,
You have something tangible.
I have something tangible. I'm looking at the same thing that people sitting in the pews in the church are looking at.
It bridges that gap between the physical and the digital. It creates a shared focal point. It anchors the virtual attendee to the physical reality of the service. It creates a sense that we are all reading this poem together at the very same time.
It's those little thoughtful details that seem to make all the difference. The difference between a conference call and a true memorial. It provides a tactile element to what is otherwise a purely digital experience.
Absolutely. That's the intention piece again.
Okay, we're coming into the home stretch here, and this is a big one. We need to talk about Section 6, ethics, culture, and living legacy. Because the internet is, well, it's the internet. It can be a wild place.
It is a public adjacent space, as the source calls it, and that brings up some really significant and tricky ethical boundaries we have to consider.
Navigating boundaries. This feels like it could be a minefield.
It can be, and privacy is the major one. When you put something online, even in a private meeting, you lose a certain degree of control over it. The source strongly emphasizes the necessity of moderation tools to keep the space safe and respectful.
You mean like trolls at a funeral? It's a horrific thought, but I guess it's a real possibility if you don't lock things down properly.
It is. We all heard about Zoom bombing during the pandemic. It was a real and awful issue. So you have to secure the link, use a waiting room. But even beyond malicious intent from outsiders, there's the issue of consent among the participants.
Consent?
Specifically, consent regarding recording the service.
Oh, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
The source is very clear on this. Families need to be explicit about whether the service is being archived and who will be able to see it later. Think about it. If someone gets up and shares a very vulnerable, tearful story about the deceased, or maybe shares a private family secret during a eulogy, do they want that video to be available on YouTube forever?
Or if there are children involved, sharing memories.
Exactly. You have to balance that desire to preserve the memory with the fundamental right to privacy of the people who are grieving in that moment. It requires a direct conversation beforehand. Just so everyone knows, we are recording this. Is everyone okay with that? Here is where this recording will live.
It's just another layer of that tech host responsibility, really. Managing not just the tech, but the permissions and the expectations.
It is. And then on top of that, we have the whole layer of cultural sensitivity.
Right. Not every culture treats death in the same way, and certainly not every generation treats technology in the same way.
The generational gap is something we touched on with the grandma factor, but it goes deeper than just usability. It's not just about ability, it's about comfort and perception. Older generations might feel that a digital service is inherently disrespectful. It feels too casual, too distant.
They might be thinking, why aren't you here? Why didn't you make the effort to fly in?
Yes. There can be a real sense of judgment there. So the text suggests patience. It suggests providing specific dial-in options for non-smartphone users so they can at least listen to the audio on a regular phone line.
Meeting them where they are.
Meeting them where they are. But then you also have to look at ritual adaptation. For many cultures, physical presence and physical acts are central to the mourning ritual. Things like touching the body, the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva, the Islamic tradition of washing the deceased.
How does any of that translate to a screen?
Well, sometimes it really challenges the digital format, let's be honest. Sometimes it can't translate perfectly. But the source argues that you can often adapt the spirit of the ritual, even if you can't replicate the physical action.
Okay, like what?
It's about finding the core meaning of the ritual and then finding a way to express that digitally. So maybe you can't physically sit Shiva in the same living room for 7 days, but you can have an open Zoom room that stays live for 7 days where people can just drop in and sit in silence together.
That's a really powerful adaptation. And finally, this brings us to the future of it all, this concept of the living legacy.
This is, for me, the most profound shift in the entire text. I mean, think about a traditional monument, a stone marker in a cemetery. You carve the name, the dates, maybe a short quote, and that's it. It stays there, static and unchanged, for 100 years.
Unless it withers away.
True. But a digital memorial, it can change. It can grow. The source describes this as growth over time.
It's like a collaborative Wikipedia page for a person's soul.
That's a great way to put it. In a way, yes, new stories can be added years later. Anniversaries or birthdays can trigger new waves of engagement with people posting fresh memories. Maybe 5 years down the line, a grandchild is born, and someone posts a picture to the memorial page with the caption, "Wish you could have met him."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Man.
That hits me.
It completely changes the relationship with grief. The expert synthesis here is that this moves us away from a moment of loss and toward an ongoing relationship with memory.
An ongoing relationship with memory. That is a beautiful way to phrase it. It's not about closure in that traditional shut-the-door sense.
Yeah.
It's about continued connection.
It suggests that we don't have to get over it and move on. We can carry that relationship with us, and the digital space gives us a dedicated place to put that love, to tend to that memory. It validates that the relationship continues even after death.
So let's bring this all home. We've unpacked a lot today on this Funeral Channel Network experience of a deep dive.
We have. It's a very dense topic, emotionally and technically.
If we had to summarize the entire journey, I think the main takeaway for me is that we aren't losing the human connection to technology, which is the common fear. We're actually finding new channels for it.
Exactly. We're learning how to broadcast life and legacy in a new, more expansive way.
These virtual memorials, at their best, they offer accessibility, so anyone can come, regardless of distance or finance. They offer continuity, the space stays open, and surprisingly, they can offer a unique kind of intimacy.
They really can. They strip away some of the pomp and circumstance and formality, and sometimes just leave us with the raw stories and the faces of the people we love, right there on our screens in our homes.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, something you mentioned during our prep for this, and I think it's a perfect, provocative way to close.
Sure. The question is this. If a memorial can evolve and grow online, if we can keep adding to it indefinitely, does the grieving process ever truly close? Or does it just become a permanent, living part of our digital identity? Are we moving toward a future where our ancestors aren't just names carved on a stone, but are, in a way, active, archived parts of our ongoing digital lives?
That is something to think about next time you see one of those remembering pages pop up on your social media feed.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for walking us through all of this. It was heavy, for sure, but also surprisingly hopeful.
It was my pleasure. It's important stuff.
And thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.